My name is Chloe, and if you were to ask anyone about me, they'd probably say I'm the quiet type, always in the background. I work as a lab assistant, which suits me fine because it means less chit-chat and more focus on the details. Life's pretty routine: work, home, and the occasional outing with my friend Lisa, who's about as loud and lively as they come. Tonight, she somehow convinced me to tag along to one of her infamous house parties. "Chloe, you gotta stop hiding in your shell. It's just a few friends, and hey, you might even have fun," she had said, practically pulling me out of my apartment. As soon as we walked in, the difference between us was glaring. Lisa was in her element, her laughter filling the room as she mingled effortlessly. I, on the other hand, found myself plastered against the nearest wall, clutching a soda like a lifeline. The music was too loud, the crowd too much, but there I was, trying to blend into the wallpaper. "Hey, you made it!" Lisa shouted over the music as she darted back to me, a guy trailing behind her. "Chloe, this is Tom." "Tom, meet my best bud, Chloe." Tom was your typical good-looking guy, tall with a smile that probably got him out of trouble more times than it should. "Nice to meet you, Chloe. Can I get you something stronger than soda? Maybe loosen you up a bit?" he joked, nodding at my drink. I managed a smile. "No, thanks. I'm good with this." Lisa winked at me, before being swept away by another group of friends, leaving me with Tom. Awkward didn't even start to cover it. "So, Chloe, Lisa tells me you're the brains of the operation at your work. A scientist, right?" Tom tried to start a conversation, leaning against the wall next to me. "Lab assistant," I corrected him, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "I'm not really the brain, more like the hands." Tom chuckled. "Modesty, huh? That's rare." We somehow stumbled into a real conversation. Tom was surprisingly easy to talk to, and as the night wore on, I found myself sharing little bits about my life, my love for quiet weekends, and my secret passion for old detective novels. He listened, really listened, and by the time the party started to thin out, I was actually laughing, the genuine kind that bubbles up without permission. "You know, you're nothing like I expected from Lisa's stories. You're cooler," Tom said, his tone sincere. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his comment. "And what exactly did Lisa tell you?" "That you were shy, kinda introverted. But you're just chill, not uptight. It's refreshing." His words, oddly enough, didn't feel patronizing. They felt like a compliment, and from someone like Tom, it meant a bit more than it should have. "Thanks, I guess. You're not too bad yourself, for a party animal," I teased back, realizing that I didn't want the night to end just yet. "Party animal, huh? I might quote you on that," he laughed, pulling out his phone. "Let me get your number. We should hang out, maybe somewhere quieter where you don't need to shout over the music." I hesitated for a moment, the old fears whispering that it was a bad idea, but then I typed my number into his phone. "Okay, but if you make me go to another party, we're going to have a problem," I warned him. "Deal. No parties. Maybe just a coffee or something," he promised with a smile that made me think that maybe, just maybe, stepping out of my comfort zone wasn't such a bad idea after all. Just a few months after the party where I met Tom, things had gotten pretty serious between us. I remember it was a chilly evening in late autumn when he popped the question. We were walking through the park, leaves crunching under our feet, when he suddenly stopped and looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through to my soul. "Chloe, I've been thinking," Tom started, fumbling a bit, which was not like him at all. He was usually so smooth. "I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're officially mine. Will you marry me?" He pulled out a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. I nodded, my voice a mere whisper. "Yes, I'll marry you." The joy on his face was unmistakable. We spent the rest of the evening talking about our future, making plans that seemed like distant dreams coming to life. But the real test came when we decided it was time to meet his parents. Tom had mentioned his folks a few times before, but he always kept the details light. When the day came, we drove out to their place in the suburbs. It was a large, imposing house that screamed of old money and pride. Tom squeezed my hand as we rang the doorbell, giving me a reassuring look. His mom, Mrs. White, opened the door. Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. "Thomas, you're here. And this must be Chloe," she said, her voice smooth but cool. Mrs. White led us into a lavish sitting room where Mr. White was waiting. He was a stern-looking man with a sharp gaze that felt like it was sizing me up. "So, Chloe, Tom tells us you work in a laboratory. That must be interesting," Mr. White said, his tone making it clear he was less than impressed. "It's rewarding work," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the judgment I could feel weighing down each word. "We were quite surprised to hear about the engagement," Mrs. White chimed in. "Weren't we, dear?" She looked at her husband, who nodded stiffly. "Yes, quite unexpected. You see, Chloe, we want what's best for Tom, and we hope you understand that," Mr. White added, his words heavy with unspoken implications. Tom jumped in. "Mom, Dad, I love Chloe, and she makes me happy. That's what matters, right?" "Of course, dear, but you must think practically too," Mrs. White countered, her eyes cold and calculating. "We would like you both to consider signing a prenuptial agreement. It's just a formality, really, to ensure both your futures." I was torn. My heart ached at the formality of it all, at the cold businesslike approach to what should have been a joyful occasion. But I loved Tom, and if this was what it took to be with him, maybe it was worth it. "If you think it's best," I said finally, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. "We think it's for the best," Mr. White affirmed, handing us a folder with documents. "Have a look and let us know your thoughts." The drive back was quiet. I kept thinking about the papers in my lap. But love, I figured, was worth a shot, even if it meant signing a piece of paper to prove it. It was a crisp morning in early spring when we tied the knot. The ceremony was to be held in a small local church with just a few close friends and family members. I remember standing in front of a small mirror in a modest white dress that Lisa had helped me pick out, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Girl, you look stunning. Tom won't know what hit him," Lisa exclaimed as she adjusted my veil. Her energy was infectious, and for a moment it eased my nerves. "Yeah, I just hope everything goes smoothly," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Don't sweat it. It's your day. Just focus on you and Tom," she advised, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. The ceremony itself was short and sweet. Tom looked handsome in his suit, and when he saw me walking down the aisle, his smile was all the assurance I needed. We exchanged vows, simple yet heartfelt. When the officiant pronounced us man and wife, and Tom kissed me, there was polite applause. It all felt right, despite everything. At the reception, which was really just a small gathering at a nearby restaurant, Tom's parents were distant. Tom's father, Mr. White, made a short toast. "We're here to celebrate Tom and Chloe," he began, his voice devoid of warmth. "May your union bring you the happiness you seek." It was so formal and cold that it might as well have been a business transaction. But I focused on the people who were genuinely happy for us, like Lisa, who was already on her third glass of champagne and narrating how we'd met to anyone who would listen. The day ended, and with it, our simple but meaningful wedding wrapped up. We drove to our new home, Tom's place, where I'd move in. It was a nice house, not too far from his parents, which I soon found out meant his mom, Mrs. White, was over a lot. Each time she visited, she made it a point to casually mention how everything in the house was Tom's and how, in case of a divorce, I couldn't claim any of it. "Remember, Chloe, none of this is yours," she'd say, her voice dripping with a faux kindness that made my skin crawl. I would just smile awkwardly, trying to hide how uncomfortable it made me feel. Tom would laugh it off every time, hugging me slightly. "Mom's just joking around. Don't take her seriously," he'd chuckle, but his laughter never quite reached his eyes. It was clear this was her way of reminding me of my place, making sure I knew that I was an outsider. But I kept hoping things would get better, that maybe, just maybe, Tom would eventually see how his mother's words were chipping away at our newlywed bliss. I tried to make the best of things, focusing on setting up our space, hoping it could feel like ours, not just Tom's. But no matter how hard I tried, Tom's parents, especially his mom, Mrs. White, made it difficult. "Chloe, dear, why don't you rearrange these dishes? They should be organized better," Mrs. White would say during her frequent visits, her tone patronizing as she inspected the kitchen cabinets that I had just tidied up. I would force a polite smile, my hands tightening around the edge of the countertop. "Of course, I'll take care of it," I'd respond, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Tom usually shrugged off his mother's comments. "She just likes things a certain way, you know how it is," he'd tell me, dismissing it all too quickly. But it wasn't just about the dishes. It felt like nothing I did was right. One evening, while Tom and I were trying to enjoy a quiet dinner, his dad, Mr. White, dropped by unannounced. "Watching your spending, I hope. Remember, it's Tom's money paying for all this," he commented nonchalantly as he looked over the spread on the table. I bit my lip, feeling the sting of his words. "We're careful with our budget," I said, keeping my voice even. But the digs didn't stop there. Every chance they got, Tom's parents reminded me of my place. "Just make sure you keep the house clean for Tom. He works so hard, he shouldn't have to worry about coming home to a mess," Mrs. White would say, her words laced with a venom disguised as concern. And it wasn't just behind closed doors. Even in public, they had a way of belittling me. At a family gathering, I overheard Mrs. White talking to a relative. "You know, Chloe doesn't earn much. Pretty much lives off you, doesn't she, Tom?" The interference from Tom's parents didn't stop at comments. They started acting like the house was theirs too. They'd come over, flop down on the sofa, and demand, "Chloe, make us some coffee, will you? Or we're out of snacks, could you run to the store?" It was as if I had become less of a family member and more of a maid. And Tom? He had changed. He used to be caring and attentive, but now he joined in their laughter. One day, while folding laundry, he said, "You do fold these all wrong, Chloe. Just how my mom showed you, remember?" His tone was light, but the criticism stung sharply. His parents laughed along with him, and Mr. White added, "She's got to learn somehow. You can't baby her forever, Tom." The worst part was how Tom criticized everything about me, from the way I managed the house to my choice of clothes. "You're going out in that?" he'd ask, his look one of disapproval as he eyed my casual jeans and t-shirt. I felt like I was losing not just the battle to win over his parents, but also the man I thought I had married. The man who had once looked at me with love now scrutinized me with the same critical eyes as his parents. Each day grew harder, the atmosphere at home more suffocating. I started to dread waking up in the morning, knowing I'd face another day of veiled insults and open disdain. The stress of living under constant scrutiny and disdain had taken its toll on me. I began losing weight, my nights were restless, and my days were long battles with anxiety. It all came to a head one morning at work when I collapsed right there among the test tubes and beakers in my lab. I woke up in the hospital, the sterile white of the room blinding me at first. I felt a dull ache in my stomach, and my head was spinning. As I tried to sit up, a nurse rushed over. "Take it easy, Chloe. You gave us quite a scare," she said, helping me adjust the pillows behind my back. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You passed out at work. They brought you in with severe dehydration and stress-related symptoms," she explained, checking the 4 drip that was hooked to my arm. I sighed, the reality of my situation settling in. The door to my room opened, and Lisa walked in, her face etched with concern. "Chloe, I heard what happened. Are you okay?" She rushed to my side, grabbing my hand. "I guess I'm not," I replied, trying to muster a smile. "This is ridiculous, Chloe. You can't go on like this," Lisa said, her voice stern, filled with worry. I knew she was right, but the thought of going back to that house, to face Tom and his parents again, filled me with dread. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. The next day, as I lay there flipping through a magazine, a man in a suit appeared at my doorway. Chloe Roberts?" he asked, stepping into the room. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" I was puzzled. I didn't recognize him. "I'm Mr. Harris, a notary. I have some unexpected news for you. You've been named as the sole heiress to your great-uncle's estate. He passed away last month, and it seems you are to inherit $20 million, he announced, holding out a stack of documents. I blinked, sure that I had misheard him. "I'm sorry, come again? Did you say $20 million? "Yes, Miss Roberts. It's all here in the documents. Your great-uncle left everything to you," Mr. Harris confirmed, handing me the papers. I was in shock. But I barely knew him. Nevertheless, he remembered you. "If you have any questions or need assistance with the inheritance process, I'm here to help," he offered. The news was overwhelming. As Mr. Harris left, my mind raced with the implications. My phone beeped with a text from Tom, the first since I'd been hospitalized. "Hey, heard about your uncle. Sorry for your loss. How are you feeling?" The message read. I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangled mess. Here I was, suddenly wealthy, and yet, I felt more alone than ever. "Getting better," I texted back, not quite ready to share the news of the inheritance. Later that evening, as I lay in the hospital bed, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on me, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old life, not now. With this inheritance, I had the means to change everything. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was still processing the shock when Tom and his parents came to visit. They hadn't been by since I was admitted, which spoke volumes. But today, they were all smiles and concern. Tom walked in first, his parents trailing behind him. "Hey, Chloe, how are you feeling today?" he asked, his voice a tad too sweet. I adjusted myself up in bed. "Better, thanks," I replied, watching them carefully. Mrs. White came over to my side, her voice dripping with a concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Chloe, we've been so worried about you," she said, her hand brushing mine. "That's kind of you," I said, pulling my hand back subtly. Mr. White stood at the foot of my bed, his arms crossed. "Yes, well, we're family. We take care of our own," he added, though it felt like a rehearsed line. Tom sat down next to me, taking my hand again. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, that's all," he said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, feeling the weight of their stares. They seemed unusually attentive. I appreciate that. As their visit dragged on, their questions began to veer towards my health in a way that felt more invasive than concerned. "So, when do the doctors say you can leave the hospital?" Mrs. White asked, peering at me closely. "Soon, I hope. I'm starting to feel a lot better," I replied, wary of revealing too much. After a few more minutes of strained conversation, they left, promising to return soon. I lay back, a sense of unease settling over me. Their visit felt off, their questions too pointed. Curious and cautious, after they left, I decided to see for myself what they were up to. I quietly got dressed and followed them at a distance as they walked toward the parking lot. Hidden by the corner of the building, I overheard their conversation. "That stupid cow doesn't know what's coming," Tom laughed crudely. "She thinks we care about her? This is all just until we get that money. And make sure she gets pregnant soon, Tom. If she has a kid, she won't leave. Then we're really in control," Mrs. White added viciously. Hearing them speak so callously, plotting to trap me further, was the final straw. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and resolve. I had seen their true colors, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. I slipped back to my ward unnoticed, my mind racing. Their treachery was clear, and my path forward was too. For perhaps the first time in my life, I knew I had to stand up for myself. I wasn't going to be their victim any longer. When I was discharged from the hospital, the idea of going back home filled me with a mix of dread and determination. As I walked through the door, I saw Tom and his parents sitting in the living room, their faces lit up with forced smiles. Mrs. White even went as far as to cook my favorite dish, spaghetti carbonara, which sat steaming on the dining table. The sight was almost comical, her trying so hard to play the doting mother-in-law. It felt like a scene from a bad play. Tom rushed up to me, his smile a little too eager. "Chloe, you're back. We missed you so much," he said, pulling me into a hug that I didn't return. "Thanks, Tom," I said, pulling away gently. I glanced around at the staged setting, my resolve hardening. As we sat down to eat, the tension was palpable. They were trying too hard to act normal, but I could see the impatience flickering in Tom's eyes. It didn't take long before he dove straight to the point. "So, Chloe, when do you think you'll get the inheritance? There's so much we can do with it," he asked, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. I put down my fork, looking him straight in the eye. "Tom, it doesn't concern you." "Because I'm filing for divorce," I stated calmly, sliding the divorce papers across the table towards him. The room went dead silent for a moment before a terrible scream erupted from Mrs. White. "Chloe, have you lost your mind? Think about what you're doing." Tom's face turned from shock to desperation. "Chloe, please, I love you. We can fix this. Don't throw away our marriage over a misunderstanding," he pleaded, his voice cracking. But I was done listening to lies. "A misunderstanding?" I echoed sharply. "Calling me a stupid cow behind my back is not a misunderstanding. I heard everything, Tom. Everything." Mrs. White's face turned red, her anger barely contained. "You ungrateful girl. We'll sue you for half of that inheritance. You'll see." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you won't," I said, tossing it on the table. "This says otherwise. You can't touch my inheritance." Tom and his parents stared at the document, the color draining from their faces. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of town where the mornings were filled with the sounds of birds, not bickering. It wasn't just a new place, it was a fresh start. I spent the first week just settling in, buying a few pieces of furniture, some plants, making it mine. The silence was a stark contrast to the constant tension I had lived with, and I loved it. It was during these days of newfound solitude that I truly began to appreciate the peace I had been missing. One Saturday morning, I was out on my balcony, enjoying a cup of coffee when Lisa came by. She burst through the door with her usual flair, holding a box of pastries. "Chloe, this place is fantastic," she exclaimed, setting the box on my new kitchen counter and hugging me tightly. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I have in years, honestly," I replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. "It's like I can finally think straight without all the noise." Lisa chuckled as she sipped her coffee. "I told you, you just needed to get out of that madhouse." "So, what's next for our free woman?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I've been thinking about that a lot," I said, leaning against the counter. "Right now, I'm just enjoying the quiet, planning my next steps. In the future, I will buy myself a big house and do charity work." As the weeks passed, I reveled in my independence, meeting with a notary for registration of inheritance. But, as expected, the peace didn't last forever. One evening, my phone rang, pulling me away from a book I was reading. It was Tom. "Chloe, please, can we talk? I've been thinking, Anne." "Tom, there's nothing left to say," I interrupted, my voice firm yet weary. "Just hear me out. I miss you, and I was wrong," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything. Can we try again?" "Tom, it's over. We can't undo what's been done. You need to accept that," I replied, ending the call. Not long after, his mother started calling. Each message left on my voicemail was more desperate and angry than the last. "You ungrateful girl. After everything we've done for you," she shouted in one of the messages. I erased them without a second thought. It wasn't long before Tom told me that he and his parents were arguing a lot. He blamed them for insisting on the prenuptial agreement, which now protected me from their greed. Each call, each desperate plea, only affirmed my decision to leave. I was moving forward, not backward. The quarrels and chaos of that family were no longer my circus, not my monkeys.